This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Efforts to close the U.S. military prison at Guantánamo Bay were dealt another setback last week when President Obama signed the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA. The bill bars the use of federal funds to transfer Guantánamo prisoners to U.S. soil, even for a criminal trial. It also includes restrictions on the executive branch's authority to transfer detainees to a foreign country. President Obama says he signed the NDAA's renewal despite his objections to the Guantánamo provisions. In a signing statement, he said the president has constitutional power to override these restrictions. He made a similar claim when he signed last year's version of the bill, but has still not delivered on promises to close Guantánamo. It was 4 years ago this month, just after his first inauguration in 2009, that President Obama vowed to close the prison no more than a year later.
In order to effect the appropriate disposition of individuals currently detained by the Department of Defense at Guantánamo, and promptly to close the detention facility at Guantánamo consistent with the national security and foreign policy interests of the United States and the interests of justice, I hereby order. And we then provide the process whereby Guantánamo will be closed no later than 1 year from now.
4 years later, 166 men remain locked up at the prison. 86 of them have been cleared for release, but they haven't been. This week marks the 11th anniversary of the arrival of the first prisoners at Guantánamo Bay. All of this comes as President Obama nominates counterterrorism advisor John Brennan to head the CIA. Brennan withdrew from consideration for the same job in 2008 amidst protests over his role at the CIA under George W. Bush. Brennan had publicly supported the CIA's policies of so-called enhanced interrogation techniques and extraordinary rendition. For more, we go to Baher Azmy, Legal Director for the Center for Constitutional Rights. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Baher. Talk about the significance of this, the 4-year anniversary of President Obama saying he closed Guantánamo, the 11th anniversary of the opening of Guantánamo.
Yeah, there are two grim markers for 166 men. This represents 11 years of hopeless, brutal detention without realistic prospect of charge, thousands of miles away from families, and is for a great number of men producing the sort of expected debilitating psychological and physical effects of indefinite detention.
86 of these men have been cleared for release, but they continue to be held?
Precisely. So the Guantánamo task force that Obama initiated as part of this first-year executive order brought together all of the relevant agencies to evaluate the detainees, defense, state, CIA, NSA, and determined that a certain number of them unanimously should be cleared from Guantánamo. And 86 of those individuals remain, that is, with a conclusion that they are no threat to the United States or the allies. And so it is a particularly grotesque moral failure to continue to detain people the jailer itself believes should no longer be detained.
Obama's signing statement casts the restrictions like forbidding federal trials for Guantánamo captives as an encroachment on executive powers. He said the law he signed, quote, substitutes the Congress's blanket political determination for careful and fact-based determinations made by counterterrorism and law enforcement professionals of when and where to prosecute Guantánamo detainees. Removing that tool from the executive branch undermines our national security. Moreover, this provision would, under certain circumstances, violate constitutional separation of powers principles. What does a signing statement mean? He still signed the bill.
Precisely. I mean, put in this way, it's little more than a press release. And these arguments have merit, but they should have been acted on in the form of a veto, which he threatened to do last year and failed to do, and threatened again to do this year and failed to do. And it's just another sort of example of a failure of his political will to take concrete steps to act on his promise to close Guantánamo.
Talk about the reauthorization of the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, overall.
It's a Defense Department funding bill, which I think which includes restrictions on the ability of the president to try people in the United States or transfer them to foreign countries. And the most problematic provisions with respect to closing Guantanamo are restrictions on the ability of the president to transfer, for example, these 86 cleared men either to their home countries or to third countries ready and willing to take them. They include some provisions that will allow the president to certify that someone should be transferred home anyway. But like his failure to veto the bill, in the past year, he's failed to act on that limited authorization to return people who've been cleared.
The significance of John Brennan being nominated to be head of the CIA. When President Obama was about to do that the first time, there was an outcry. At the time, he withdrew from consideration for the same job and amidst protests over his role at the CIA under George W. Bush, publicly supporting the CIA's policies of so-called enhanced interrogation techniques, which others call torture, and extraordinary rendition. What has changed, except that we've moved from a Republican president, George Bush, to a Democratic president?
Little or anything has changed, and what's perhaps one of the most depressing things about this nomination is that ultimately we shouldn't be surprised, because in so many areas Obama has fully embraced the Bush policies that he so seriously criticized, and the nomination of Brennan, the head of the CIA, is a sort of insult to adds insult to injury. The original injury was Obama's statement or policy that he would not investigate seriously allegations of criminality of high-level Bush officials for torture.
His colleagues,
and even predecessors. So that was at one pass a serious problem. But now to nominate to the head of the agency the person partly responsible for these activities not only looks forward, but is a very clear signal that he's embraced and sort of immunized individuals for their past misconduct.
For the rest of the broadcast, we're going to bring our audience an extended interview with Samuel Haj, the first time in the United States. Only journalist held at Guantanamo, held by the U.S. military for more than 6 years, picked up by the Pakistanis in December of 2001, then brought to Kandahar, then brought to Bagram, tortured, brought to Guantanamo, where he was held year after year. Can you talk about the significance of his case? Yeah,
well, it's important that you're talking to him because I think he speaks very eloquently for what many hundreds of other detainees suffered who cannot tell this story, and so he will speak very well about what he endured, but the listener should note that this was, in a way, not an exceptional case. Setting aside the likelihood that his detention was vindictive because he was an Al Jazeera reporter, but the brutality he suffered in Afghanistan, the fact that he was turned over for political reasons or for a bounty, the arbitrariness of his detention in Guantanamo, and the brutality of his treatment there is a story that can be replicated hundreds of times. People who have quieter and less eloquent voices than his own.
How do you think this story will change? I mean, still 166 men held at Guantanamo. What will happen? They stay there until they die?
The grim reality is more people under the Obama administration have died in recent years than have been charged or tried criminally, Obama has offered no realistic prospects for taking either practical steps to release individual people who should be released, or ending this really odious paradigm of indefinite detention.
Baher Azmy, I want to thank you for being with us, Legal Director for the Center for Constitutional Rights. Thanks so much for watching this report from Democracy Now!, your daily independent global news hour. We don't accept advertising or corporate funding, but rather rely on donations from viewers like you. Please make your contribution by visiting democracynow.org. We need your support today to keep bringing you this hard-hitting, in-depth reporting.